Alyssa Carter gripped the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles white, the setting sun splashing golden light through the bug-splattered windshield. Her head throbbed with the faint ache of too many voices echoing from the third-grade classroom. Her eyes stung with fatigue, and her thoughts drifted to nothing in particular. The way they always did after a long day. Home was just 5 blocks away, but the rush hour traffic made every red light feel like a lifetime. She reached to switch her radio stations, hoping music would fill the hollow in her chest that the day had left behind. The city outside her window pulsed with Friday exhaustion. Horns blared, brakes squealed, a siren wailed somewhere behind. Cars pressed tight, boxed in on every side. She glanced at her reflection in the rear view. Brown hair, limp, eyes shadowed, lips in a thin line. She'd never looked lonelier. The car crept forward, bumper to bumper, past a strip mall she'd driven by 100 times. Her thoughts wandered to her tiny apartment, to what she'd cook, frozen lasagna or cereal again, and to the weight on her chest she never seemed able to shake. The world outside felt distant, like she was behind glass, except for the heat and the smell of exhaust and the flicker of someone darting between parked cars on the median. She slowed. A flash of fur, a blur, cut through the sea of metal. Alyssa's foot hit the brake. In a split second, everything shifted. She saw the German Shepherd before she understood what was happening. A big dog, ribs sharp beneath matted fur, coat smeared with city grime, eyes wide and wild. He bounded up from nowhere, paws scraping blacktop, and with a desperate leap threw himself straight at her open passenger window. It all happened in a blink. A burst of motion, paws on glass, nails scrabbling. For a heartbeat, Alyssa froze. Then instinct took over. She slammed her foot down. Horns erupted behind her. Cars swerved. Someone shouted. The dog was halfway inside her car, then all the way, tumbling into the back seat in a heap. She nearly screamed, one hand clawing for her seatbelt, the other bracing herself against the dash. Time slowed. The world faded to the sound of her own pulse in her ears. The shepherd lay in a heap, sides heaving, tongue lolling, eyes wide and glassy with terror. For one mad second, Alyssa imagined he might attack. She'd seen enough videos, heard enough stories, but he didn't move. Didn't snarl, didn't bark. Just collapsed as if every muscle had failed him. Cars honked. A passing cyclist stared. Alyssa's heart hammered so loud she felt it in her teeth. She twisted in her seat, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The dog looked at her, pupils so dilated she couldn't see their color, then turned away, pressing himself as far as possible into the corner behind her seat. His whole body trembled. She swallowed, breathing hard. "Hey," she whispered, her voice rough from hours of teaching. "Hey, it's okay." The words felt stupid, like a cliché from a children's book. Still, she said them, softer this time. "I'm not going to hurt you." The shepherd did not answer. He barely blinked. Alyssa's hands shook as she reached for her phone. She almost called 911. What did people do when a strange dog jumped in their car? But she stopped. What would she say? A dog? Pick me? She put the phone down, swallowing hard. The world outside continued its mad rush. Alyssa eased the car into gear and inched forward, every nerve raw. The shepherd didn't budge. He stayed coiled tight, tail tucked, eyes on the floor mats, as if he could will himself invisible. 2 blocks crawled by. She kept glancing in the rear view, not sure if she was more afraid for herself or the dog. There was something about the way he had leapt, desperate, reckless, purposeful. He hadn't just wandered, he had chosen her. A delivery driver pulled up beside her at the next stoplight, glancing in and doing a double take at the sight of a wild German shepherd slumped in the backseat of a Honda Civic. Alyssa tried to ignore the looks, her cheeks burning. The shepherd barely noticed. She thought about shooing him out, pulling over and letting him go. But every time she started to say something, the word stuck. He looked so tired, so used up, as if the world had wrung him out and tossed him aside. She couldn't bring herself to move him. Not yet. A memory surfaced. Her father's voice, low and steady. Sometimes the lost ones don't need you to save them. They just need you to be there while they figure it out. She blinked hard, throat tight. The city faded behind her as she turned onto her street. Sunlight caught the windows of her apartment building, painting everything gold and brittle. She parked, heart still thumping, and turned to look at the dog again. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. She saw her own fear reflected in his eyes, a silent plea for something neither of them could name. Alyssa took a shaky breath, fingers trembling on the door handle. "All right, buddy," she whispered, her voice barely above the hum of the cooling engine. "Let's get you home." She didn't know why she said it. She didn't know what she was promising. But as she opened the door, the shepherd didn't run, didn't snarl. He just stayed, frozen, silent, waiting. In that moment, Alyssa Carter felt the axis of her life tilt just a little. Not enough to notice from the outside, but deep down, she knew nothing would ever be quite the same. She left the engine running, grabbed her purse, and slid out. She held the door open for a long moment, waiting to see if the shepherd would bolt. He didn't. He watched her, unmoving, eyes dark and wary. Neighbors passed by, Mrs. Jenkins with her shopping bags, a teenager with a skateboard. They stared. Alyssa shrugged, her cheeks flushed. Just, giving a friend a ride. She muttered to no one. As she reached for the back door, she hesitated. The shepherd's chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. He looked smaller now, somehow shrunk down by fear or exhaustion, or both. She reached in slowly, voice gentle. "It's okay. You're safe now." Her hand hovered over his fur, unsure. The shepherd flinched but didn't move away. Finally, Alyssa stood back, giving him space. "You can stay as long as you need," she said, almost believing it herself. And as dusk settled over the city, the two of them, a lonely teacher and a lost German shepherd, stood at the edge of a new beginning neither one had asked for. Alyssa Carter's hands were still trembling as she nudged her car door close, glancing over her shoulder at the German shepherd sprawled on her back seat. Streetlights flickered to life, painting long shadows across the cracked parking lot. Her apartment complex, River Benadas, into her place, looked like any other on the block, a grid of faded brick and battered mailboxes. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, she wasn't coming home alone. She'd expected the shepherd to leap out as soon as she opened the door, to vanish into the dusk and become just another wild story to tell at work. Instead, he curled up tighter, ribs pressing into the torn upholstery, eyes squeezed shut like a child hiding from a nightmare. Alyssa hovered uncertainly, every instinct torn between leaving him there and coaxing him out. Passers-by slowed, heads cocked in curiosity. One older man with a Boston Red Sox cap paused, then just nodded, as if seeing stray dogs in cars was nothing new. "Hey, buddy," Alyssa said softly, crouching beside the open door. Her voice shook less than her hands now. "Come on, it's all right. I won't hurt you." Nothing, not a flinch, not a growl, just a steady, trembling silence. Alyssa hesitated, thinking about calling animal control. She pictured uniforms, catch poles, paperwork, the inevitable questions. Where did you find him? Has he bitten anyone? Is he dangerous? The idea filled her with dread. He didn't feel dangerous. If anything, he looked like he was on the verge of falling apart. Another car pulled in beside her, headlights briefly illuminating the shepherd's battered fur, the smudges of dirt and flecks of blood near his ears. Alyssa swallowed. She remembered stories on the news about dogs abandoned in the alleys, about fights, about what people could do when they thought no one was watching. She took a deep breath and made a decision. The kind you don't make with your head, but with something deeper, older, bone deep. He needed help. Maybe in some quiet way, she did too. Standing, she stepped back, giving him room. "You can come out if you want, or you can stay. Either way, I'm not leaving you here." Minutes dragged by, punctuated by the sound of distant traffic and a baby crying on a nearby balcony. Alyssa's legs began to ache from crouching. She eyed the time, almost 7. Her stomach rumbled, but she ignored it. Hunger was a distant concern. A sudden commotion startled her. 2 kids raced past on scooters, shrieking with laughter. The shepherd tensed, head snapping up, his body shrinking deeper into the shadows. Alyssa saw the flash of panic in his eyes, the wild, desperate need to disappear. Okay. Easy, she murmured, reaching for her purse. She dug out an old granola bar, unwrapped it, and set it gently on the curb beside the car. He didn't move. The granola bar sat untouched. The sky was indigo now, with streaks of purple and gold. Alyssa glanced at her building, her own safe little box, where no one waited and nothing ever really changed. She couldn't leave him here. Not like this. She made up her mind. If he wouldn't come out, she'd bring him in herself. Moving slowly, she slipped into the car beside him, bracing herself in case he lunged or snapped. Instead, he cowered, pressing his body into the footwell, eyes darting everywhere but her face. Alyssa felt a pang of sorrow. What had this dog been through? She reached out, palm up. I won't hurt you. Promise. Yeah. Her voice seemed to cut through the tension, just a little. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time she noticed flecks of gray around his muzzle. Maybe he was older than she thought, or maybe hardship just aged him before his time. A new thought crossed her mind. Did he have a name? Was there someone, somewhere, missing him? She scooted forward and gently, so gently, slid her arm beneath his chest, lifting just enough to coax him into movement. He shuddered but didn't resist, didn't bare his teeth. Inch by inch, she guided him out of the car, her own heart pounding like a drum. Once outside, the shepherd wobbled on shaky legs. Alyssa kept her hand close, but not touching, murmuring encouragement as they crossed the lot. A neighbor paused on the stairwell, phone in hand, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Alyssa gave a quick, tight smile. Just, helping out a stray. Inside the lobby, the shepherd's nails clicked on tile, each sound sharp in the quiet. The elevator groaned open. Alyssa pressed the button for the 3rd floor, glancing down at her unlikely companion. The shepherd's sides heaved, sweat darkened his fur. When the doors closed, he startled, then shrank into the far corner, head ducked. In the cramped elevator, Alyssa studied him, scarred, underfed, yet dignified in a strange, battered way. She searched for a collar. Nothing, just old wounds and fresh grime. As the elevator jerked to a halt, Alyssa felt a sudden pang of fear. What if he panicked inside her apartment? What if he destroyed everything in a frenzy? She pushed the thought aside. She'd made her decision. Sometimes, you just trust the path ahead. In the hallway, she fished out her keys. Her hands trembled again as she unlocked the door. She propped it open and stepped aside, letting the shepherd decide. He hesitated, paused on the threshold, eyes flicking to her, then to the warm glow spilling from the apartment. Alyssa held her breath. At last, he slipped inside, almost ghost-like, disappearing into the shadows near the kitchen table. She set her purse down, exhaled, and flicked on the light. The shepherd circled once, then huddled behind the couch, wedging himself so tightly she wondered how he fit. Alyssa slumped onto a dining chair, exhausted and relieved. She caught her reflection in the window, hair tangled, face smudged, eyes bright with adrenaline. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone. Her phone buzzed. A text from Emily, her closest friend, lit up the screen. Friday wine night? You coming? Alyssa stared at the message. She considered replying, but what would she say? Sorry, I just rescued a half-dead dog from my back seat. She started typing, then deleted it. Instead, she stood and peered over the couch. The shepherd stared back, eyes wide and unblinking. I should call you something, Alyssa mused aloud, voice gentle. Can't keep saying, hey, buddy, forever. She watched him, searching for inspiration. The answer came unexpectedly, a whisper in her mind. Milo. The name fit, soft but sturdy, a name for someone who'd survived a storm. "All right, Milo," she said, testing it out. The shepherd flinched, but didn't bolt. The apartment was silent, the city hushed outside her window. Alyssa knew there would be questions tomorrow. Questions from herself, from neighbors, from whoever might be searching for this broken animal. But for tonight, there were just two survivors, sharing space, learning how to breathe in the same air. She rummaged in her pantry, found a battered dog bowl she used to keep for her childhood dog, filled it with water, and set it near the couch. She laid a folded towel nearby, in case Milo wanted softness. Then she sat on the floor, legs crossed, phone in her lap. She waited. For what? She wasn't sure. Maybe for Milo to trust her. Maybe for herself to trust this new, strange twist in her life. And as the city lights blinked outside, Alyssa Carter made her choice. Quiet, simple, but irrevocable. She would not turn away. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Night in Alyssa's apartment was a gentle hush, broken only by the quiet ticking of a kitchen clock and the faraway drone of city life seeping through the window cracks. Alyssa flicked on a lamp in the living room, its golden light pooling over a threadbare rug and a row of half-read books. But the corners of the room remained heavy with shadow. Milo, the German shepherd, wedged himself into the tightest pocket of darkness he could find, behind the old blue couch that looked out over the fire escape. Alyssa crouched by the couch, knees stiff from sitting too long in the car, hands now steady but cold. She tried not to stare. She'd seen fear in students, shaky hands during spelling tests, eyes wide before a parent-teacher meeting. But this was different. This was animal, raw, built from months or years of learning to survive by shrinking, hiding, vanishing into whatever crevice would swallow you whole. She set a ceramic bowl of water down near the couch's edge and retreated, giving Milo space. He didn't move, not even a flick of his tail or a turn of the head, only his ribs fluttered with each shallow breath, nose tucked between trembling paws. Alyssa felt foolish, standing in the middle of her own living room, as if she were the guest, and Milo, the host. She considered calling Emily, telling her everything, but something in the silence between her and this broken animal made her pause. Some wounds didn't want to be shared just yet. She wandered into the kitchen, keeping Milo in the corner of her vision, and pulled together the evening's ritual. Microwave pasta, 2 slices of wheat toast, a splash of ginger ale over ice. She offered a piece of toast to Milo, holding it out with slow, open fingers. He didn't budge. She left it on the floor beside the water bowl and moved away, letting him have his dignity. The silence thickened. Time crawled. Every tiny sound, a pipe groaning, a neighbor's TV, the soft creak of the floor. When Alyssa paced, felt magnified. She turned on the radio, then immediately turned it off. The voice of the late-night DJ felt too intrusive, too human. She tried reading, perching on the edge of her worn armchair, with a book about the Dust Bowl that one of her students had recommended. The words blurred, drifting away from her. All she could focus on was the soft rustle of Milo's fur every time he shifted, the small whimpers that barely escaped him. The loneliness in the room seemed to swell, not lessen, with company. It was almost midnight as to when Alyssa realized she hadn't properly exhaled in hours. Her back ached. Her phone buzzed twice. Emily again, then her mother. She silenced it. There were no words for this moment. She stared out the window, where the city glimmered in orange and blue, and tried to remember the last time she'd felt this uncertain about her own life. Milo did not eat. He did not drink. He pressed his body into the wall, as if trying to flatten himself into nothingness. Alyssa tried not to watch him too closely, not to hover. She busied herself with small things, folding laundry, sorting through a stack of lesson plans, watering the spider plant that hung above the sink. Every so often she'd steal a glance at Milo, hoping for a sign that he was thawing. In the bathroom, brushing her teeth, Alyssa caught her own reflection, hair mussed, eyes tired, mouth a pale line. She'd lived alone for almost 3 years now, since the breakup, since the last round of hopeful, "you just need to get out more" from well-meaning friends. She'd gotten used to the quiet, but this new kind of silence was heavier, charged with anticipation and fear. When she returned to the living room, Milo was still there, still unmoving. A small puddle of drool had formed beneath his chin. Alyssa set a clean towel near him, speaking softly. "It's okay, or you can have the couch if you want, or the bed, or the whole apartment. I just want you to rest." The words tumbled out awkwardly, but they filled the air with something kinder than silence. She moved to the bedroom, leaving the door open. Her bed, a simple twin, sheets patterned with tiny yellow flowers, looked even smaller tonight. She pulled the covers tight around her, listening to the sounds outside. The hum of a distant train, the sigh of wind through the fire escape, the uncertain rhythm of Milo's breath. Sleep would not come, not really. Alyssa drifted in and out, mind looping through worry and regret, wondering if she'd done the right thing. What if Milo was sick? What if he belonged to someone, and they were out there searching, heartbroken? What if he never let her get close? Once, she thought she heard footsteps, Milo maybe, braving a look around the apartment. She didn't move. She wanted him to have his freedom, even if it meant he kept his distance. The night stretched on. Alyssa's dreams were thin, restless. She saw flashes. Milo running through alleys. Milo chained to a post. Milo alone in the pouring rain. She woke with a start more than once, always reaching for her phone, always stopping herself from calling someone who could fix this. By dawn, the sky was a bruise of gray and lavender. Alyssa slipped out of bed, feet bare on cold linoleum, and tiptoed into the living room. Milo was still behind the couch, eyes open, wide, and haunted. He hadn't slept, neither truly had she. She sat on the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, and waited for the day to begin. She thought about all the things she'd wanted from life: connection, warmth, someone to come home to. She'd never expected a dog to fill that space, least of all one so wounded, so silent. The sun crept over the city, painting the buildings in soft gold. Alyssa reached for her phone, opened a new message to Emily, then closed it again. She didn't want to explain, not yet. She spoke, finally, her voice just above a whisper. "We'll figure it out, Milo. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. Just stay. Just breathe." The words were simple, but in that quiet, heavy morning, they were everything. Neither of them moved. The city came alive outside, car doors slamming, people laughing, a siren wailing in the distance. Inside, Alyssa and Milo sat in the hush, sharing the silent space that stretched between fear and hope. It would take more than a single night to close the distance between them. Alyssa knew this, but in the silence, in the small acts of patience and gentleness, a bridge was being built, one that neither of them could see, but both could feel deep in their bones. They had survived another night. Sometimes that was enough. The next morning, Alyssa moved quietly through the apartment, her bare feet barely making a sound on the faded hardwood floor. She stopped by the couch, careful not to cast a shadow over Milo, who was curled tight into the corner, eyes wide and watchful. The silence between them was fragile, like a sheet of thin ice, ready to crack under any sudden move. Sunlight filtered in, coloring the room with soft yellow. The city was already alive beyond the windows. The distant roar of buses, a car alarm, voices drifting up from the sidewalk below. For Alyssa, it all felt muffled, as if she and Milo were tucked away in a pocket outside of time. She crouched, laying her palms flat against the cool floor, keeping her voice gentle. "Morning, Milo." "You made it through the night." He didn't move, but she noticed the slightest flicker of his tail. A tremor, almost imperceptible. It felt like a small victory. Alyssa rose, stretching her arms over her head. Her body ached from the strange, fitful sleep, from worry, from a sense of being wound too tightly. She filled a pot with water for coffee. her mind whirring through possibilities. She needed to get Milo to eat, or at least drink. He'd refused everything the night before, shrinking further into himself each time she tried to offer something. She rummaged through the fridge, bypassing leftovers and boxed salads. On a whim, she pulled out a pack of chicken breasts, remembering her childhood dog's weakness for boiled meat. She set a pot to simmer, steam curling into the morning air, filling the apartment with a warmth that felt comforting, familiar. Mid, as the chicken cooked, Alyssa tidied around the apartment, always moving slowly, never approaching Milo too directly. She swept the kitchen, folded her worn quilt, even watered the spider plant on the windowsill. Every few minutes, she'd glance over at Milo, noting the way his ears twitched at the soft domestic sounds, the squeak of a cabinet, the chime of her phone. She set out a bowl of warm broth, rich with the scent of chicken, and placed it near the couch. Not too close. She wanted Milo to feel safe, to make the choice himself. Then she retreated, sitting cross-legged at the far end of the living room, with a stack of student essays in her lap. She read aloud, softly, half for herself and half for him, her voice a gentle, constant thread, weaving through the stillness. Minutes ticked by. Milo didn't move. Alyssa resisted the urge to look at him too often. She didn't want to pressure him, didn't want to repeat the mistakes people made with frightened children, hovering, crowding, insisting on comfort before trust had a chance to grow. Outside, rain began to tap against the window. A soft, persistent rhythm. Alyssa found herself hoping the sound might calm him, might lull him into believing this space was safe. She imagined him braving the open floor, approaching the food, maybe even letting her see him eat. Then, a shift. A sound so small she almost missed it. As Milo's nails scraping gently on the wood, Alyssa held her breath, eyes fixed on the essay before her, pretending not to notice as he stretched, body long and thin and still trembling. He crept forward, nose quivering in the direction of the broth. Alyssa's heart hammered, her whole body gone still. She focused on her breathing, on the words in front of her, willing herself not to move an inch. Milo lowered his head, sniffed at the bowl, and took a tentative lick. He paused, looked around the room, and then, very slowly, ate, tongue curling over the warm liquid. It wasn't graceful, wasn't the joyful gulping of a healthy dog, but it was something. Alyssa felt her eyes sting, relief and hope mingling in her chest. She didn't speak. She didn't reach out. She just sat, reading about volcanoes and community helpers and the dreams of third graders who'd never met a dog like Milo. The sound of him eating was soft, hesitant, but it filled the apartment with life. When the bowl was empty, Milo stepped back, eyeing Alyssa warily. He didn't come closer. He didn't thank her, of course not, but he didn't retreat behind the couch either. He simply stood, uncertain, then settled near the base of the coffee table, his body still angled away but not hiding. Alyssa let out a long, careful breath. She checked the clock. Almost noon. She was supposed to be at a curriculum planning meeting in an hour, but the thought of leaving Milo alone, even for a short time, made her uneasy. Would he panic? Destroy the apartment? Try to escape? She sent a quick email to her principal. Family emergency, working from home, and left it at that. It wasn't a lie, not really. Family had taken on a new, unexpected shape overnight. After lunch, Alyssa took a call from Emily, her phone on speaker as she graded math tests. She kept her voice low, glancing at Milo every few sentences. "Are you okay?" "You sound different," Emily said. Alyssa hesitated, unsure how to explain the silent, trembling dog at her feet. I found someone. Or maybe he found me." Emily laughed, missing the weight of Alyssa's words. "Finally. A Tinder match that doesn't ghost you?" Alyssa almost smiled. Something like that. She left it there, unwilling to let the delicate quiet be broken by someone else's disbelief. Throughout the afternoon, Alyssa kept her routines soft and predictable. She read aloud, narrating her day. "Time to grade spelling tests, Milo. You want to hear about some truly creative spelling? She found herself talking more than usual, her words filling the apartment with gentle company. As the light began to fade and the rain picked up, Milo shifted closer. He didn't approach directly, but each hour brought him a foot nearer. Alyssa celebrated each small move internally, resisting the urge to reach out and ruin the fragile trust. Evening fell. Alyssa made herself a grilled cheese and split a corner of bread from Milo, placing it near the coffee table. He waited until she was in the kitchen to eat it, but eat it he did. That night, Alyssa left the living room light on, the soft golden glow stretching across the floor. She slept on the couch, blanket tucked around her, leaving her bedroom door open. Milo settled by the far wall, not behind the couch this time, but not close either. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, Alyssa listened to the rain, to the steady breaths of the dog who had finally, cautiously, taken his first meal in a new world. She thought about the strangeness of comfort, how it grew from patience, from small gestures, from letting another being set their own pace. Milo didn't thank her. He didn't come closer. But he was still here. And in the deep hush of the apartment, Descartes, Alyssa felt hope flicker, small and persistent, in the space between silence and trust. The days stretched into a rhythm, uncertain and tentative, but steadier than Alyssa would have guessed that first chaotic night. She woke each morning half expecting Milo to be gone, for the couch to be empty, and the apartment to feel big and echoing again. But every dawn, she found him, curled in some new corner, always quiet, always watching. Monday, she saw the first sign that things were shifting. She'd come out of the shower, wrapped in a faded towel, hair dripping, humming an off-key tune. The apartment still smelled faintly of boiled chicken from the day before. She padded to the kitchen, intent on coffee, and stopped in her tracks. Milo wasn't behind the couch. He was by the hallway, just barely visible, his silhouette painted in morning light. He didn't flinch. He didn't move closer either, but his eyes followed her. Sharp, dark, alive, in a way that made Alyssa's chest ache. She smiled, trying not to make it a big deal. "Morning, Milo. Want to help me choose what to wear?" She joked, gesturing toward her closet as if the whole world was ordinary and safe. He didn't answer. Of course not, but she liked talking to him all the same. She'd never been the type to speak out loud in her solitude. The words made her feel less invisible. And Milo seemed to listen, even if just by not running away. That week, Milo established a strange sort of orbit. He didn't cling, didn't demand anything, but he started appearing in places where Alyssa spent her time. Behind the kitchen table when she was making dinner, peeking from the hall when she took a phone call, sitting quietly by the door. As she graded a stack of crumpled spelling tests, she made a point not to push, not to lure him closer than he wanted. Instead, she started narrating her days, as if to an unseen audience. "This one spells giraffe, with 3 F's, she'd murmur, holding up a paper. "You think that's creative or just wrong, Milo?" He'd tilt his head, the faintest quiver of his ears betraying interest. On Wednesday night, she settled on the living room rug, piles of papers and red pens scattered around her. Milo stationed himself a few feet away behind a dining chair, close enough to smell the ink and paper, far enough to bolt if the mood shifted. Alyssa read aloud the short stories her students had written, tales of magic cats, flying cars, soccer games gone awry. She paused after a particularly wild story about a dog who could talk to squirrels. "I bet you've got stories too, Milo. If you ever feel like sharing, I'm here." Her voice was quiet, soft as dusk. She began to notice other things, too, tiny gestures that said more than words ever could, the way Milo's ears perked when she laughed at a text, the gentle sigh he let out when she turned the radio low, the careful watchfulness when she stepped outside to fetch the mail and came right back in. Each evening, Alyssa made dinner, sometimes just soup, sometimes elaborate sandwiches stacked with too many ingredients. She always made a small plate for Milo, placing it a careful distance away, then turning her back as he ate. He still waited for her to leave the room, but the distance grew smaller every day. On Friday, he snatched a piece of roast chicken off the plate before she'd even finished crossing to the couch. Rain came again on Saturday. A soft, endless drizzle that blurred the city and washed everything in gray. Alyssa opened the window, just a crack, enough for the air to smell like damp earth, and sat with a mug of tea. Milo lay on the floor, not far away, chin resting on his paws, watching the rain streak down the glass. Alyssa wondered what he saw. What memories flickered behind those wary eyes? She didn't press. She only spoke softly. Rainy days used to make me sad. Now they just feel, slow. You ever feel that way, Milo? His tail thumped. A whisper of sound against the rug. Alyssa's chest tightened. She felt in that moment the ache of all the things she didn't know how to say. She spent the afternoons with lesson plans, reading new books, sometimes aloud, sometimes just mouthing the words, letting them fill the apartment with a warmth she hadn't realized she missed. Milo's presence grew more comfortable, less electric with tension. She found herself listening for the rhythm of his breathing, the shuffle of his paws. His silence felt companionable now, not like absence, but like the cautious beginning of trust. One morning, a week after he'd first entered her life, Alyssa woke to find Milo curled not behind the couch, but only 3 feet from her bed. For a moment, she just lay there, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest, the twitch of his feet in dream. He looked peaceful, young almost, despite the scars. She moved slowly, careful not to disturb him, and made coffee in the kitchen, the ritual grounding her. She remembered her own childhood dog, Lucy, who used to wait by the bedroom door every morning. Milo was different, warier, older in spirit, but his silent nearness reminded Alyssa of what it felt like to be chosen, to be trusted even a little. That afternoon, Alyssa video called her mother for the first time in weeks. She angled the screen so her mom wouldn't see Milo, afraid of the questions she wasn't ready to answer. You look different, honey, her mom said, eyes narrowing. Alyssa smiled, ducking her head. I guess I feel different. Her mom sighed, sensing more than Alyssa would admit. You'll tell me when you're ready. Just remember, you're not alone. After the call, Alyssa returned to the living room. Milo sat in the hallway, watching her. She met his gaze, heart hammering, then sat down on the floor, legs crossed. You know, you're not alone. Either, she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rain. The week closed with quiet evenings and cautious comfort. Milo began to explore when Alyssa was out of sight. She found evidence everywhere. A chew mark on an old slipper, a nose print on the window, a blanket dragged halfway across the living room. He never played, not really, but he watched her more closely every day. Sometimes at night, she heard him settle near her shoes at the foot of the bed. Alyssa told her friends, if they asked, that she was busy. She left out the details, left out Milo, left out the strange new shape of her loneliness. He's not my pet, she practiced saying in her head, unsure if she believed it. He's just here, and I'm okay with that. For the first time in a long while. She meant it. The circle between them grew smaller, the silence softer. Two solitary creatures learning to orbit one another, never quite touching, never quite letting go. Alyssa understood at last that some healing took time, and that sometimes just showing up day after day was enough. Sunday arrived with the kind of brightness that forced its way through even the thickest curtains, painting the living room in squares of sunlight. Alyssa lingered in bed, her body heavy but her mind clear in a way it hadn't been for weeks. On the floor, only a couple feet away, Milo lay curled on an old fleece blanket. He was awake, eyes open and thoughtful, but for once he didn't flinch when Alyssa shifted beneath her covers. He only watched, tail tapping the floor in slow, uncertain beats. She sat up, drawing her knees to her chest. She could smell him from here, an earthy, bitter mix of old rain, fear, and neglect. For days, she'd tried to ignore it, convincing herself that trust mattered more than cleanliness, that some comfort came before soap and water. But now that he slept closer, that his presence became less ghostly and more real, the need to care for him grew sharper. Alyssa made coffee, moving through the quiet morning with her new ritual. 2 mugs, one for her, and a chipped bowl of water for Milo. He followed her with his eyes, his gaze steadier now, his body less hunched. She didn't offer breakfast just yet. Instead, she leaned in the kitchen doorway, considering him in the sunlight. His fur was a mess, patches matted with old dirt, dark streaks around his ears, a crust of dried blood near one paw. A few old scars peeked through the tangled hair. He licked at his side, as if aware of the attention. Alyssa's heart squeezed as she knelt a few feet away. "Hey, Milo, how about a spa day? Or at least a little bath?" Her voice was soft, coaxing, as if she were speaking to a child. He cocked his head, ears flicking, uncertain. She set about gathering supplies, an old towel, a bottle of baby shampoo left over from her niece's last visit, a worn plastic cup, and a box of dog biscuits she'd picked up on a hopeful whim. The bathroom was small and filled with sunlight, the tub white but scuffed around the edges. She left the bathroom door open. "Milo?" she called, kneeling to meet his eye. He didn't bolt, but neither did he come closer. She moved slowly, inching toward him, biscuit in hand. He sniffed at the treat but didn't take it from her palm. Alyssa let the biscuit fall to the floor, then waited. Milo's nose twitched and he inched forward, teeth flashing for a brief second as he snapped up the biscuit. "That's a good boy," she whispered. She reached out, her hand trembling a little, and stroked the side of his neck. So gentle it was almost nothing. Milo froze. For a heartbeat, Alyssa worried she'd gone too far, but then he released a long, shaky sigh and let her touch linger. She hooked her fingers under his collarbone, feeling the bones beneath, and guided him gently toward the bathroom. He followed, slow and uncertain. At the threshold, Milo balked, nails skittering against the tile. Alyssa sat on the floor beside him, patient as rain. She hummed. A low, simple tune, a melody from childhood summers on her grandparents' porch. Minutes passed. The tub filled with warm water. Milo watched, tense but curious. Alyssa talked to him softly, her voice steady. "It's just water, Milo. It won't hurt, I promise." Finally, with one last breath, she lifted him, arms around his middle, guiding him into the tub. The panic hit fast and sharp. Milo thrashed, claws scrambling for purchase, head twisting. Alyssa wrapped her arms around him, not too tight, humming louder now. "It's okay, buddy. I'm right here. I won't let you fall." Water sloshed everywhere. Her shirt clung to her skin, hair plastered to her cheek. Milo struggled for a moment longer, then went still, sides heaving. Alyssa stayed with him, hand on his chest, voice constant. "Good boy. You're so brave. Just a little longer." She worked quickly, wetting his fur, letting him sniff the shampoo before she lathered it in gentle circles. The grime came away in thick gray swirls, revealing the true texture of his coat. Coarse in places, surprisingly soft in others. She counted scars, old and new, her heart breaking for each one. She avoided his eyes, afraid of what she'd see there, fear, betrayal, or something worse. Instead, she watched his body, reading the language of his muscles, the tension in his back, the way his tail finally relaxed a little. She rinsed him with a cup, slow and careful, whispering apologies each time water trickled over his nose. Milo flinched but didn't fight. He stood, shivering, while Alyssa sang an old folk song under her breath. When it was done, she wrapped him in the biggest towel she owned, pulling him close, letting his weight rest against her legs. For the first time, Milo let her. He was trembling, but he didn't pull away. Alyssa pressed her cheek to his damp fur, breathing in the scent of soap, relief, and something almost like gratitude. She dried him as best she could, rubbing the towel in slow, rhythmic motions. He leaned into her, just a little. The bathroom filled with warmth, steam fogging the mirror, water pooling around their feet. When Milo was clean, cleaner than he had likely been in months, Alyssa let him go. He shook himself, sending drops everywhere, then looked up at her, eyes wide but not afraid. She smiled, tears prickling her eyes, and reached for the box of biscuits. This time, he took one straight from her hand. The two of them sat on the bathroom floor, soaked and exhausted, sunlight streaming through the high window. Alyssa laughed, low and soft, and Milo watched her, head tilted, as if trying to understand this new thing. Joy. After a while, she stood, legs stiff, and opened the door. "Come on, handsome. Let's get you a proper nap." Milo followed, fur still damp, tail wagging slow and uncertain. He settled on the rug in the living room, paws crossed, eyes half-lidded with sleep. Alyssa changed into dry clothes, made herself tea, and sat near him, feet tucked under her. She felt lighter, as if something heavy had been washed away along with the dirt. The apartment, too, felt changed, airier, brighter, more alive. For the rest of the day, Milo stayed close. He watched Alyssa cook, his head on his paws, his eyes tracking her every move. When she settled with a book, he lay beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could hear the soft sigh of his breath. That evening, as dusk colored the sky in blues and pinks, Alyssa stroked Milo's clean fur. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. For the first time, she felt him truly relax. The distance between them shrank to nothing. In the golden hush, Alyssa realized she wasn't just caring for Milo. He was caring for her, too. A gentle hush settled over Alyssa's apartment as the week wore on, a peace that felt almost sacred. The old anxieties, whether Milo would panic, whether she was doing enough, began to ease into the background, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of shared days. Alyssa started to recognize Milo's signals, the soft flick of his tail when she entered the room, the way he pressed his nose to the air before approaching his food, the guarded but hopeful glances he cast her way as she moved about her routines. On Thursday afternoon, a warm breeze rolled in from the open window, carrying the scent of spring and the sound of children playing down in the alleyway. Alyssa, stretched out on the living room floor, had surrounded herself with papers and open books, her glasses perched low on her nose. Grading was always a meditative act for her, a way to shut out the world and lose herself in the imperfect logic of spelling and arithmetic. She felt Milo's gaze before she saw him. He lingered at the edge of the room, head slightly down, ears at half-mast, his body a question mark of longing and hesitation. For a while, he only watched, eyes deep and alert. Alyssa made a point of pretending not to notice, continuing to read aloud passages from her students' stories, her voice soft and conversational. She described how Joey wrote about a magical raccoon who could skateboard, how Lisa's poem about rain sounded almost like a song. Each word was an invitation. I'm here, and you're welcome here too. As the shadows grew longer and the light slanted golden across the hardwood, Milo took his first real step forward. He approached, slow and careful, crossing the invisible border he'd drawn around himself since that first desperate jump into her car. Alyssa could hear his claws clicking against the floor, a nervous percussion that matched her own heartbeat. He stopped just within arm's reach, lowering his nose to sniff at the papers scattered on the ground. Alyssa froze, not with fear, but with a deep, reverent patience. She didn't move, didn't extend a hand. She simply breathed, letting him choose. Milo edged closer, his body trembling in that delicate balance between retreat and curiosity. He circled once, then twice, nostrils flaring as he gathered every trace of her scent, every molecule of safety and home she could offer. And then, without warning, he pressed his nose lightly to her leg, quick, deliberate, almost businesslike. His breath was warm against her skin. Alyssa felt the contact like an electric current. Every muscle went still. She didn't reach out, didn't speak. She let the moment land, whole and unbroken, afraid that even a whisper would shatter the spell. In that touch was 1,000 unspoken things. apology, hope, the fragile beginnings of trust. For several heartbeats, neither of them moved. The apartment was quiet, but for the distant laughter from outside and the steady hum of the refrigerator, the sunlight pooled around them, turning the floor to gold. Milo lifted his head and met her gaze. And there was no fear there now, just exhaustion and a raw kind of honesty that made Alyssa's chest ache. He gave a soft, questioning whine, barely more than a sigh, and then settled on the floor beside her. Paws crossed. Shoulders finally relaxing as if he'd put down a heavy burden. Alyssa smiled, slow and careful, her eyes bright with the sting of unshed tears. She set her book aside and shifted her body so she sat cross-legged, giving Milo space but not moving away. She let her hand rest on the floor, palm open, an invitation with no expectation. He edged closer, his flank just brushing her knee. She felt the heat of him through her jeans, the steady rise and fall of his chest. She breathed in time with him, letting her own anxieties fade into the hush of the moment. She thought of all the times she'd longed for this. A companion, someone to bridge the gap of her solitude without asking for more than she could give. Milo had asked for nothing, had demanded nothing, and in return she'd found a kind of belonging she didn't know she needed. The afternoon slipped by. Alyssa read quietly, her hand occasionally brushing against Milo's fur. He didn't flinch. Sometimes he looked at her, searching for meaning in her face, and sometimes he dozed, his body finally giving in to a sleep that was deep and dreamless. As dusk settled, Alyssa turned on the lamp and got up to make dinner. Milo followed, padding softly after her, his tail wagging just once as she set a piece of boiled chicken on a plate for him. For the first time, he ate with her still in the room, glancing up every now and then as if to reassure himself she wasn't going anywhere. That night, Alyssa made tea and curled up on the end of the couch with her feet tucked under her. Milo lay at her feet, close enough that she could feel the slow, calming warmth of his presence. She watched old sitcom reruns on mute, letting the flicker of the television and the cadence of Milo's breathing lull her into a peace she'd almost forgotten. When it was time for bed, Alyssa stood and stretched, hesitating in the hallway. Milo looked up, eyes questioning. She smiled, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. "You can come if you want," she murmured, her voice barely more than a breath. She left her bedroom door open and turned down the covers. A few minutes later, she felt a gentle weight at the foot of her bed. Milo, cautious but determined, circling twice before settling in a tight ball. Alyssa lay in the dark, her hand trailing over the edge of the mattress to rest lightly on his back. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved for a long time. The silence between them was no longer heavy, but full of all the things they'd survived, full of the tentative hope that tomorrow would be better than yesterday. And in the darkness, Alyssa smiled, knowing at last that she was not alone. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, casting soft patterns on the stack of papers, half-finished mugs of coffee, and a single blue leash Alyssa had bought on impulse the day before. Milo lay near her feet, head resting atop her old running shoes, breathing deep and steady. The hush of the apartment was comforting, but Alyssa couldn't ignore the tug of responsibility at the edge of her mind. She'd known this moment was coming, the moment when she had to admit that Milo might belong to someone else, that he wasn't just a mystery dropped into her life by fate. It was easier to pretend sometimes that he was meant for her, that she was meant for him. But every time Milo lifted his head at the sound of a car door, every time he paused at the window as strangers passed below, Alyssa wondered if someone out there was missing him, aching for news. The idea haunted her. Milo had chosen her, yes, but maybe not by choice. Maybe out of desperation or confusion or fear. Maybe there was a child somewhere who had fallen asleep with Milo's old collar under their pillow, praying he'd come home. Alyssa owed it to Milo, and to herself, to try. She opened her laptop, the screen flickering to life. She scrolled through local Facebook groups, searching for lost dog posts. She found dozens. Blurry photos, desperate pleas, sometimes angry, sometimes hopeful. German Shepherd missing near 5th and Pine. Large dog, no collar, answers to Buddy. Alyssa studied each face, every detail, searching for Milo in the eyes of strangers. None of them were him. She exhaled, tension leaking from her shoulders, but she didn't stop. She snapped a photo of Milo, after some coaxing, after a treat and gentle encouragement. He sat in a patch of morning light, head slightly tilted, eyes grave and noble. Alyssa typed out a post. Found dog, German Shepherd, male, found near Jefferson and 6th. No collar, no tags. Very scared, but safe and clean. Please DM with any info. She hit send, her fingers trembling a little. She posted in every local group she could find. Neighborhood Watch, Lost and Found Pets, animal shelter pages. She even texted the photo to her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who seemed to know everything about everyone in the building. Hours passed. No replies. Alyssa checked her phone every few minutes, hope and dread twisting together. Each time the screen stayed blank except for spam and an appointment reminder from the dentist. The next step was the animal shelters. She called the city shelter first, her voice awkward and hesitant. I found a dog, a German Shepherd, a big, male, no collar. The woman on the other end sounded tired but kind. What's his temperament? Scared, not aggressive, just lost. We'll keep a note. If someone calls, we'll let you know. You can bring him in if you want. Alyssa hesitated. He's been through a lot. I don't want to stress him out more. We get it, the woman said. Just keep us posted. She tried other shelters, leaving voicemails, filling out online forms. Every time she hit submit, she glanced at Milo. He seemed unchanged, snoozing in the square of sunlight as if he'd lived there his whole life. Alyssa wondered if she was doing the right thing, wondered privately if she wanted anyone to respond. The final step was the vet. Alyssa scheduled an appointment and loaded Milo into the backseat of her car, this time with the windows closed. He settled in without protest, trusting as if he understood that the world outside couldn't be worse than what he'd already survived. The clinic was a small, cheerful place with a painted mural of animals on the waiting room wall. Milo's presence drew stares, his size, his scars, his haunted eyes. Alyssa sat beside him, hand resting on his back, murmuring nonsense. When the receptionist called his name, Milo followed, wary but willing. The exam was gentle and slow. The vet, Dr. Keegan, was a woman in her 50s, with gentle hands and eyes full of empathy. She checked for a microchip, scanning Milo's neck and shoulders, but nothing beeped. No chip, she said, scribbling notes. No collar, no tags, no tattoo. Sometimes these dogs have been lost a long time. Sometimes, she trailed off, glancing at Alyssa. Sometimes, no one's looking. Alyssa nodded, throat tight. He's been hurt, starving, but he's not mean, just scared. Dr. Keegan offered a faint smile. The gentle ones, they survived because the bull was to disappear, but they still deserve to be found. Milo endured the exam stoically, eyes never leaving Alyssa. He tolerated the poking and prodding, the needles and the thermometer, as if he understood that all of it was necessary. When it was over, Alyssa knelt and wrapped her arms around him, feeling his steady heartbeat under her fingers. On the way home, Milo sat taller in the back seat, head turned toward the window, watching the city blur past. Alyssa wondered what he remembered, what streets he'd wandered, what homes he'd passed, what hopes he'd left behind. That evening, she sat on the floor, laptop open, reading through lost dog posts again. The city felt bigger than ever. So many stories, so many animals, so much longing. She scrolled through comment threads full of heartbreak and hope, of people searching for what they'd lost. She answered every message, even the ones that were obviously not about Milo. She responded to a woman in the next town over who was missing a black lab, to a teenager whose golden retriever had slipped his leash, to a family who'd lost a small, elderly mutt. She offered advice, encouragement, comfort. The community of searchers wrapped around her, a virtual circle of people refusing to give up. Milo slept beside her, head on her knee, as the night deepened. Alyssa stroked his fur, her own heart caught between hope and dread. What if someone called? What if no one ever did? Days passed, no replies. Each morning Alyssa checked her phone, feeling relief and guilt in equal measure. She started to hope, selfishly, guiltily, that Milo was hers now, that fate had decided for her. She watched him relax more, watched the fear soften around the edges. He began to recognize her footsteps, the sound of her laugh, the way she sang along with the radio while washing dishes. Still, every evening she checked her posts, her messages, her voicemails. She looked at Milo, this dog who had chosen her and who she, in turn, had chosen. She spoke aloud, half to him and half to herself. Sometimes, maybe, the ones who disappear are the ones who need to be found the most. Maybe it's not about where you came from, Milo. Maybe it's about where you're willing to stay. And in the gentle hush of the apartment, as night pressed against the windows and Milo's breathing steadied beside her, Alyssa understood. Sometimes the search wasn't about what you lost, but about what you found when you decided to look. The days unfolded in slow, golden waves, soft autumn light curling through the blinds, casting honeyed shapes across the living room floor. Alyssa found herself waking before her alarm most mornings. Her first thought now always of Milo. Sometimes she'd lie in bed for a few minutes, listening for the quiet shuffle of his paws as he moved around the apartment. His presence had become as much a part of the home as the faded blue couch or the patchwork quilt on her bed. There was no single moment when she decided that Milo was staying. It happened gradually, in the way that the seasons change, imperceptible day to day, but obvious when you stop to look back. It was in the new routines, buying a bag of kibble on the way home from work, picking out a sturdy blue leash and matching collar at the pet store, scribbling dog food under a grocery list without a second thought. Each act was a quiet promise. You belong here. Alyssa set about making Milo a true part of her world. She found a soft dog bed, plush with high sides for curling up against, and set it beside the radiator where the warmth would gather in the cold mornings. She attached a shiny tag to his collar, her own number on one side, Milo stamped on the other. She stood for a long time at the front door, holding the tag in her palm before fastening it. Somehow, the simple clink of the metal was more meaningful than any ceremony. On their first walk together, Alyssa held the leash loosely, giving Milo space. He walked a few steps ahead, glancing back now and then for reassurance. The city felt different with him beside her. Friendlier, brighter, less intimidating. Strangers smiled as they passed, a man on a bicycle, a pair of elderly women out for morning coffee, a cluster of teenagers in hoodies. Milo didn't react much, but he watched Alyssa for cues, learning how to read her in the smallest gestures. He still didn't play. He didn't fetch, didn't chase after squeaky toys, didn't bound around the park with other dogs. He was content to observe, sitting by Alyssa's feet as she graded papers on the bench outside, watching birds hop across the grass, else breathing in the scent of earth and fallen leaves. Alyssa wondered about the life he'd led before, about the games he might have played as a puppy, and what had made him grow so cautious and still. But there were signs of change, even if they were small. Milo began to follow Alyssa from room to room, not anxious, just quietly present. If she left the apartment for a few minutes to take out the trash or check the mail, he waited by the door, tail flicking once, twice, at her return. At night, he took to sleeping near her shoes at the foot of the bed, his breathing steady and reassuring. Sometimes she'd wake in the dark, toes brushing soft fur, and smile, safe in the knowledge that she was not alone. Alyssa started telling friends about him, little by little. To Emily, she sent a photo. Milo lying in a patch of sunlight, his eyes bright, his ears up. "You adopted a dog?" Emily replied, a dozen exclamation points. Alyssa grinned, typing back, "Not adopted exactly, he's just here." But even as she wrote it, she knew it wasn't the whole truth. Milo was more than just here. He was hers, and she was his, in the quiet way that people and animals sometimes choose one another. On Saturdays, she took Milo to the corner store, tying his leash to the bike rack outside. She'd dash in for milk and bread, her heart thumping, and hurry out again. Milo always waited, patient and calm, greeting her with a soft nudge as if to say, I knew you'd come back. She registered him at the local vet clinic, making sure his vaccinations were up to date. Dr. Keegan smiled at them both, scribbling notes in Milo's chart. "He looks good," she said, rubbing Milo's ear. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Alyssa nodded, pride blooming quietly in her chest. There were still shadows, of course. Loud noises sometimes made Milo freeze, his body rigid with memory. If a neighbor slammed a door or someone shouted in the hallway, he'd retreat to his bed, eyes wide and far away. Alyssa learned to move slowly, to kneel down and speak softly, offering comfort without crowding him. She understood now the power of patience. She told herself, told her friends too, that Milo wasn't really her pet. "He's just here," she'd say, half joking, half defensive, as if claiming him outright would break some fragile spell. But every day, she found herself making more room for him, both in her apartment and in her heart. One chilly Sunday morning, Alyssa watched as Milo sat at the window, watching the street below. Sunlight dappled his fur, the scars barely visible now. She brewed coffee, set his bowl down beside her own breakfast, and sat on the rug. "You know, Milo," she said, stirring cream into her mug, "I never thought I'd get used to sharing my space. Never thought I'd want to." He looked at her, head cocked, tail tapping once against the floor. She thought about all the ways her life had changed since he'd jumped into her car, how the routines she'd built to protect herself had softened, how the walls she'd raised around her heart had begun to let in light. She found herself talking to Milo about everything, her dreams, her fears, the funny things her students said, her worries about the future. He listened always, his gaze steady and warm. When friends came over, Alyssa introduced Milo as my roommate, laughing at the look on their faces. He greeted visitors politely, retreating to his bed when things got too loud. Everyone loved him. How could they not? But Alyssa knew their bond was something special, something built in silence and patience, and 100 tiny acts of kindness. Each night, before bed, Alyssa sat on the floor beside Milo, her hand resting gently on his back. "You're not just here," she whispered one evening. "You're home." He closed his eyes, his breathing slow and even, and Alyssa felt the last traces of loneliness slip away. In the quiet, she realized what she'd gained. Not just a dog, but a companion, a silent, steadfast presence who had chosen her and whom she had chosen in return. Their scars fit together, not perfectly, but just enough. On a morning in late October, Alyssa woke to the soft sound of rain tapping against the windows. The city beyond, her small apartment shrouded in gray. The air was brisk, tinged with the promise of winter. She moved through her routines quietly. Coffee brewed, slippers shuffled on wood, a gentle yawn stretched into her hand. Her movements unconsciously timed to the gentle, rhythmic breathing of the dog who had made himself at home in every corner of her world. Milo lay curled on the living room rug, his eyes half closed, tail sweeping lazily whenever she passed. He was cleaner now, weight restored, his scars almost hidden beneath a coat that gleamed bronze in the dull light. Sometimes, in the mornings, Alyssa would find him sprawled at the foot of her bed, his head resting against her running shoes, as if standing silent guard over her dreams. That day she felt a quietness settle in her chest, a kind of peace she hadn't known for years. She spent the morning reading, her back against the couch, legs stretched out across the rug. Milo watched from his bed, occasionally thumping his tail in response to her voice as she read aloud. "Listen to this, Milo. Did you know hummingbirds weigh less than a penny?" she said, grinning. He blinked, the faintest hint of a smile in his gaze. The rain continued, steady and soft, the world outside painted in streaks of water in the shifting glow of headlights. The apartment felt insulated from time. each minute stretching out, unhurried, filled only with the comfort of shared presence. At noon, Alyssa prepared lunch. Eggs scrambled with spinach, toast golden and crisp. She always made a plate for Milo, a small ritual now. Chicken or beef, sometimes a little cheese if she was feeling generous. Today she slipped him a corner of toast as she sat beside him on the floor. They ate together in companionable silence, watching the world through the rain-speckled window. Milo finished first, licking his lips, then nudged his bowl closer to Alyssa, tail wagging in small, hopeful flicks. She laughed, the sound warm and easy. "Greedy boy," she teased, ruffling the fur behind his ears. It was in that moment, as she sat cross-legged on the rug with her empty plate and the afternoon light shifting gold and gray, that Milo did something he had never done before. He stood, stretched, and with a slow, almost ceremonial grace, crossed the few feet between them. He stopped right in front of her, pausing just long enough for her breath to catch. Then, in one fluid motion, he lowered himself to the floor and gently, deliberately, rested his head in her lap. Alyssa froze, heart pounding. For a moment she could only stare at the weight of him, the trust, the surrender, the quiet acceptance. She reached down, her hand trembling with emotion, and let her fingers drift through his thick, warm fur. Milo closed his eyes, his whole body relaxing against her. They sat like that for a long time. Rain fell in silver threads. The apartment was hushed, save for the steady thrum of Milo's breath and the occasional sigh from the city outside. Alyssa felt the world narrow to the softness of his head in her lap, to the gentle heat of his body pressed close, to the simple, overwhelming truth that they had both, after so much fear and wandering, found a place to rest. She didn't speak. Words would have broken the spell. Instead, she stroked his head with slow, even movements, letting her own tears fall quietly, tears she hadn't even known she was holding back. Tears for the loneliness she had carried for so long, for the pain Milo had survived, for the improbable, miraculous fact of their finding each other in a world so full of loss. Eventually, as the light began to fade and the room grew soft with shadow, Alyssa leaned her head back against the couch and closed her eyes. Milo's breathing was steady, warm, grounding. She let herself drift, not asleep, but not quite awake, a space between worlds, held together by trust. Later, as the rain slowed and evening crept in, Alyssa found herself thinking about the journey they'd taken. The uncertainty, the silence, the slow, careful building of trust. She realized that the greatest gift Milo had given her was not loyalty or companionship, but the courage to open her life to the unexpected, to say yes to something fragile, to let hope take root even in the hardest soil. She thought about her old fears, that she would always be alone, that her life would never be more than routine, about Milo's fears, never spoken, but written in every flinch, every shadow in his eyes. Together, they had faced those fears not with grand gestures, but with the smallest acts: a bowl of warm broth, a quiet presence in the night, a gentle touch offered, and at last accepted. The day faded into night. Alyssa moved to the kitchen to make dinner, and Milo followed, always a silent shadow at her side. After they ate, she washed dishes while he settled near her feet, content to simply be close. When it was time for bed, Alyssa paused at the doorway. She patted the quilt, inviting. Milo hesitated only a moment before leaping onto the mattress, circling twice before settling against her legs. She smiled, turning off the lamp, her room awash in blue shadow. In the darkness, Milo shifted, pressing his head to her thigh, warm and heavy. Alyssa rested her hand on his back, feeling the rise and fall of his breath, the steady pulse of life beneath her fingers. And in that hush, she let the lesson of the last weeks settle into her bones, a truth so simple it felt sacred. Trust was a gift, but so was being trusted. Healing came not in thunderclaps, but in quiet moments shared, in the willingness to stay, to listen, to be. She thought, in those final moments before sleep claimed her, of all the silent ones, human and animal, waiting for a safe place to land, a soft place to lay their heads. And she made a quiet vow to be that safe place whenever she could, to choose kindness again and again. In the morning, she knew the world would rush in again. There would be work, responsibilities, old worries, but tonight there was only this, a gentle weight in her lap, a dog's faith in the dark, and the sure, shining knowledge that together they had both found home.